Hey friends, welcome to Rugged. Young adulting is tough, and I'm here to show you how to make it easy. You'll learn mindset strategies to harness your thoughts and emotions in ways that help you achieve your goals. I'm your host, Trey Tucker, so let's dive right in. I bet you don't realize how connected our brains and our guts are. I know I didn't. Today's guest, Dr. Emily Leeming, is a dietitian and an expert in this area. She's the author of the book Genius Gut, and she's got some practical tips on how we can improve our health through nutrition. She'll also tell us the signs of an unhappy gut and the surprising benefits of a 10-second kiss. Here we go. Tell me that story of first, how did you become a chef and then end up in this field?
So I grew up in Scotland in the middle of nowhere, and my thing, 3 brothers, and my thing, the way that I could shine in my family was cooking. And so because we lived in the middle of nowhere, there wasn't really many opportunities to then, get a job. This didn't require my parents sort of driving me off somewhere. So I ended up going and doing kind of weeks and months in fishing and shooting lodges up in the Highlands of Scotland, cooking for families. And it just really snowballed from there. And actually, the day that I graduated from my undergrad in nutrition, I got a call from a family who I cooked for, and they had a super yacht. And it was the captain saying, "Oh my God, we need a chef. Can you be out here next week?" And I thought, well, why? No idea. And that's what I did. I was on super yachts for 5 years as a private chef. So cooking for crew and cooking for the guests. And that was really, where it all began. But really from this very deep love of food and appreciation for flavor.
Wow. Oh, that's okay. I had to ask, what's your favorite dish to make, or maybe the most popular one you've made?
I think it so depends. I think for me, it's like having a table filled with lots of different things and having people come over, and there's this slight element of chaos. So that's the kind of style of cooking that I love now. And that could just be lots of fresh salads and then, some meat and then lots of beans. I'm obsessed with anything that's got beans in it. So it's really a variety of different things. I don't know if there's necessarily. I do have a very good carrot cake recipe. I am kind of known for that. It's a family heirloom.
Oh my goodness, you are speaking my language.
It's very, very good.
So one of the things that I love the way you explain the idea of gut health is the metaphor of employees inside your gut. Can you take us through that and how that helps explain what's going on?
Yeah, so in your gut, you have this kind of thriving community of 100 kind of trillion microorganisms, so tiny living organisms. And really what we get excited about is you want to have lots of different types of these different microorganisms. So most of the time when we're talking about your gut microbiome, which is this collection, we're talking about bacteria because they happen to be the ones that we know the most about. And with these bacteria, it's not really about yes, we want to know that you've got certain levels of them, but we also want to know that there's lots of different types of these bacteria. So kind of like if you're, this microbiome was a company and you had lots of different employees, you would want the employees to, you want a group of people who are great at marketing. You want a group of people who are building a product. You want some people who are head up running HR and, throwing drinks and maybe it's that social person who's kind of making everyone happy. You need all these different people who are making that company thrive because they're all doing different roles, but yet kind of working together rather than just having kind of one individual who's maybe very good at one thing, but then you don't have the rest. So it's very much the same with our gut microbiome. We need them to be lots of different types of microbes, lots of different types of bacteria to work together for your health.
So the variety is the key there, and they all got to be, I guess, synthesized together.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're still, some of them are quite competitive with each other. So there is kind of this kind of fighting kind of in-house, over food and things like that. But that's a kind of healthy competitiveness because if you don't want to have one type just dominate across the rest and be a kind of dictator. That is actually not particularly healthy for your gut. You want them to kind of have this stable community, and then you want them to be doing lots of different things. And when I say doing lots of different things, what I mean is that they're feeding on the food you eat, and then they're making molecules that are important for your health. And this is why I talk a lot, and I talk a lot in my book as well about this. I don't really talk about what the names of the bacteria are and whether you have this one or that one. I talk about what are they doing? What are they making? Because it's that action that is important for your health, and not just in your gut, but also those molecules can cross into your body and reach your heart, your liver, your lungs, and even this kind of new exciting science of also influencing your brain as well.
Tell me more about the brain piece of it, and because I know the general concept, but help me understand on a little bit deeper level. And I love that this is the book you've written, because I feel like, and tell me if I'm wrong, the gut brain connection has really only been talked about now maybe 2 or 3 years that I've been aware of. Maybe it's been going on longer than that, but just help me understand more of that gut brain connection.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. I feel like, this gut-brain connection, there's been a bit of a black box that, we're only really just starting to get an insight into. And I think for a big kind of part of that is that we've seen the brain as just being separate from the rest of the body for a really long time. It's been kind of compartmentalized, and therefore we don't kind of historically think about them being connected. But at the same time, the way that we talk about the gut-brain connection is already in our language day to day. We already use it quite often, and we talk about gut feelings. We talk about feeling kind of, sick to our stomach, or kind of punch in the gut, or having butterflies when we're nervous. So we already have all these ways that we're talking about this and recognizing this gut-brain connection in our everyday language. But now it's that we're kind of really starting to delve and understand what the impact is from, particularly now, our gut and what we eat can actually then have this influence on our brain as well. I would say this probably kind of kicked off in 2 ways. So really from the diet side, there's been lots of different studies that have looked at population patterns and seen that people who tend to have a healthier diet tend to have a lower risk of getting things like depression, or kind of anything that might be, most kind of brain conditions that are kind of related to kind of chronic disease as well. And then we've then had this landmark study that came out only kind of 5-6 years ago, if not a few years more, that was in Australia. It was a landmark study where it was the first randomized control trial where they were looking at using diet as a kind of complementary therapy for people with clinical depression. And from what I understand, it took them a really long time to even be able to recruit participants, because the doctors were like, oh, this is ridiculous. This is not going to have any effect at all. Why would diet play any role in this? And what was really interesting is that after they put the half the group onto a Mediterranean diet. So this is a dietary pattern that's kind of full of fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, whole grains, oily fish, nuts and seeds. And the group that were on that diet, 32% of them achieved clinical remission by the end of that 3-month period. And that's in comparison to the support group who weren't on the diet and had 8% achieving remission. So just showing that's really kind of impactful figures that we've actually then seen studies after that really showing kind of, that there is this connection between what we eat. And I think that really makes sense from the sense that, our gut isn't just this, garden hose tube that food comes in and then gets, pumped out the other end. It is, supplying nutrients to our body, and it's supplying nutrients to our brain as well that our brain needs. But now this new exciting piece as well, where that food is also influencing our gut microbes that are further down kind of in our lower large intestine. And so it's then having another kind of effect and helping them to make these molecules, which can also, from what we can see from this early science, influence our brain and perhaps our mental well-being as well.
Okay, you talked about that depression study. And when I talk to therapy clients about whatever it is that they're going through, whether it's depression or anxiety or what have you, I tell them, look, if you need medication, I'm all for that. But first, let's see if we can just look at some other ways of trying to get at this. And I'm not anti-pharmaceuticals, but I know if something is available to us in nature, whether it be food or something like that, why would we not try that first rather than to run into something that's been synthetically created in a lab? And to hear that depression study, 32% of people went into remission instead of the 8% in the control group. That alone is a huge encouragement. Are there studies that cover other issues like anxiety? Because that's probably the most prevalent mental health struggle there is right now.
Yeah, so anxiety tends to be kind of less covered, or kind of we don't get such as strong results as what we're seeing with depression. And just to be clear, with the depression study, the SMART study, they were still on their medication, they were still doing therapy. So it was very much like adding that extra kind of piece of the puzzle in of just an extra tool they could use for support. What we do see generally is that people who tend to have a healthier diet, again, there's patterns in the population, tend to have lower levels of anxiety. But what's really interesting, and I think this makes really, absolute sense when we think about this for, perhaps we've experienced ourselves or we've seen in other people, but, that relationship when we think that we're having the kind of quote unquote most perfect diet, and actually that is like actually related to being more anxious. And kind of, so we've got this kind of, and I think that's really important because I think, we've really got to understand that if we are trying to strive for perfection, in any aspect of our life, that can actually inherently be damaging in our mental health. And actually perhaps the sweet spot is, and we see this with nutrition, with behavior, that, it's not having the quote unquote perfect diet. What even is that? You know what I mean? So yeah, there's that relationship there as well.
So on that note, since there is no perfect diet, and obviously striving for perfection a lot of times does create more anxiety, are there types of diets that are going to work better for somebody like me versus a different diet that's going to be a better fit for someone else? Or are there general principles that everybody needs to at least somewhat strive for?
There's absolutely general principles. And I think, nutrition is like a very trendy topic. And I think it then can become, in a way, quite confusing for people because it's all about the latest kind of clickbait headline that might say that, this new diet or this new way of eating is kind of, the latest thing. But actually the same old, we see the same old principles being true throughout that haven't changed. And that really is, and I really, really believe, and I know this from the research and also from, when I had clients working in a clinic as a dietitian, that it's about those small sustainable changes that you can make. And I'm sure you see this in your practice as well. It's those foundational things that you can do for your health that are they're going to have the biggest impact on how you feel. So those are things like trying to have some more fruits and vegetables. If that is something like, trying to kind of have some greens with your lunch, like an extra portion, beans, really great thing to be adding in. Could you if you're making a meat stew or something like that, add some beans in with it? Can you blend it into some hummus? Have that as a side with some crackers and some carrots. Really simple things, just small things that you can do on a day-to-day. And then whole grains, really important for our health, and a lot of us not eating enough of them, and are really rich in fiber, which is really important for supporting your gut microbiome. Fiber is effectively found, I think fiber's had this kind of boring reputation. It's been seen as just something that just helps you, have a smooth poo. Basically, I don't like talking about bowel movements. I like just to say poo here in the UK, because it is what it is.
Why avoid it?
Why avoid it? But when it comes to our gut microbiome, fiber is your gut microbe's favorite food. So really, to have a thriving microbiome, you want to be eating plenty of fiber. And most of us in the UK, the US, are really struggling to get the fiber we need. I think the stats in the US are that only getting half the fiber of the recommended. For the UK, it's 30 grams of fiber a day for adults. And so that effectively feeds your gut microbes, and then they make these special molecules called short-chain fatty acids, which are not just great for your gut, but also to help support your brain health as well. And these are found in whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts and seeds, and also your fruits and vegetables. So those kind of core things. A really good thing to focus on fiber, because also foods that are high in fiber are also packed with lots of other nutrients as well. So you're likely, by eating more fiber, you're then naturally getting a lot of other nutrients without needing to think about it too much. And then things like oily fish, really important also for supporting brain health. So that's things like salmon, trout. You could have tuna, anchovies, sardines, kind of plenty of options there. And yeah, it's really those core foundational principles of trying to get those small shifts in. I really talk a lot about, small things like making half your plate fruits and vegetables at each meal.
Okay.
You don't need to weigh anything. You can just look on your plate and adjust the proportions. And I think, small things like that will have a really impactful shift over time.
That's helpful, because I was about to ask, is there some way that we can know whether or not we're getting at least close to enough of what we need, whether it be fiber or fish and whatnot? So that just to take that plate and split it in half, what's the other half need to be? If fruits and vegetables are on one side, is the other half protein or something else?
Yeah, so normally say kind of a quarter of your plate protein, a quarter of your plate whole grains. And that's going to just really help. And that'll help you keep you feeling full for longer. You're less likely to get hangry towards the end of the day. I know we all relate to that. But also, tapping back into this, relationship between, your gut and your brain. We've seen kind of other research where, increasing the amount of fruits and vegetables that people have eaten have kind of led to kind of increase in happiness. So it's not even for people who, necessarily have clinical depression. Mental health is a spectrum. This is kind of relevant for everybody. And I think what I think is so important about this, that when we talk about nutrition, quite often we talk about it as if it's, we're warding off some illness and disease that's perhaps far down the line, which yes is important, but actually nutrition is also about how you feel right here and now. Your mood, your energy, your cognition, feeling your absolute best, being able to run around with your kids or the grandkids. Those are the things that kind of really help. And that's really your health on a day-to-day basis.
And it seems like, I hate using the term quick fix, but I mean, we all want a quick fix, and whatever I'm eating today, it's going to make me feel better or worse probably today and probably for the next few days. So it's about as close to a quick fix as you can get. I don't know. Am I thinking the right way on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's different pieces of research that kind of looked at this from a timescale, and I think it's probably very dependent on that person and their situation. But one kind of piece of research that comes to mind, where they looked at lots of people's food diaries and their kind of mood diaries across a kind of period of time, and they found that they were able to kind of predict how happy people were the next day by how many fruits and vegetables they'd eaten the day before. And I think, it's not to say that we can't enjoy a delicious slice of cake or kind of all these things. I think this is all about having balance, but just focusing on, can I perhaps add in, another piece of fruit or, a handful of nuts each day. Being Brit, big tea drinker here, so I've got the kettle and I put the kettle on, and I've got, a jar of mixed nuts that I keep by the kettle so I can see them. So I can have, I'll have a handful of nuts when I'm making myself a cup of tea in the afternoon. So, small things that kind of can prompt you to make those kind of healthier choices easier. It just kind of is, and I think we all recognize what, perhaps our own individual barriers are. And what might work for one person might not work for the next. And really it's about finding what's the easiest way for you to be able to get past that barrier, and also really make, if you're struggling, make that change small and work your way up. Don't feel like you've got to have a complete, change of everything, because that we see that's when stuff goes wrong. And yeah.
And it's just not going to get adopted, whether it's this type of habit or something else. If you try to just take the mountain in one day, you're not going to climb it. So it's those little steps. Can you go back to what you just said about finding what works for you? Is there some sort of measurement that you can figure out, like, okay, I'm trying these foods, and other than how I feel, are there other ways of measuring whether these foods are the right ones for me?
So I think if you're having digestive issues, I guess that's where perhaps you want to go to your doctor or see a dietitian if that's something that you're feeling very uncomfortable by. I wouldn't. I think the key thing is perhaps to avoid cutting things out unnecessarily, or just because that can mean that you're then missing out on like key nutrients. And really, it's about having a broad variety of different foods that kind of provide you with the nutrition that you need. One thing to note with fiber is that, again, this is like, small step approaches. If you have a huge amount of fiber and you're not used to it, you are going to get kind of gut issues that are not harmful, but it's basically like throwing, a massive music festival for your gut microbes, because, they're like, woohoo, you fed me all this delicious, my favorite food. They throw a party. And part of the byproduct of them feeding on, this food and making these molecules for your health is actually gas. So yeah, you probably will feel a little bit more bloated after meals, but that's not a bad thing. That's just your microbes having a happy feast. And that does your gut does adapt to fiber over time. So that should go. And so, just being aware of, start small, work your way up. And also hydration is such a big thing that I think, we don't talk about enough. Really important for our brain. 70% of our brain is made up of water. And also our brain is very sensitive to any slight drop in hydration. There's rough guidance around having 8 glasses of water a day. But that, could be quite different from person to person, depending on where they live and how hot it is, how much exercise they're doing, and if they sweat a lot. So I tend to say like a really good way is also to look at the color of your pee as well. So things like you want it to be the color of kind of a straw color, kind of pale lemonade, if it's like a homemade lemonade. So it's got a bit of color to it, but it's still quite opaque. If it is concentrated apple juice, that is where you want to be drinking some more water. So that's quite an easy way, again, to just, our body is telling us so much already, and just being kind of in tune with that.
That's helpful, because when it's something visual like that, I'm much more likely to notice it. I think for me and a lot of, especially men that I know, we just keep plowing ahead, or at least I do. And I can go days and not realize, like, oh, wait, I don't feel all that great. And I finally start tuning into my body. I'm getting better at that over the last couple of years. But I think before, I didn't notice how I felt if I ate a day or two's worth of fast food only versus if I had gone a day or two eating nothing but fruits and vegetables. I think I was just so in my head and disconnected from my body that whatever was going on in my body, I was just ignoring it, or maybe not trained to pay attention to that. So having something visual like that with the urine, that's helpful. Are there other things we could be looking at visually like that?
Yeah, I mean, no, we're talking about that, and we've already talked about poo. I do believe that looking at your poo tells you so much. One of the top questions that I get asked by people very, very often is, should I take a gut microbiome test? They're really expensive. You've got to, basically you scoop a bit of your poo up into a test tube and you send it off to a lab and it gets tested by a company. And that really just gives you a readout of what microbes you have in your gut. But I just think, really the science isn't there yet to give you any advice based on that gut microbiome test that you wouldn't get just from perhaps listening to this podcast or kind of reading, certain books on the topic. So instead, I really believe that, and we know that by looking at your poo, however, and we should be doing this on a regular basis, look at your poo, and there's certain things that your poo is going to be telling you about how healthy your gut is and how healthy your gut microbiome is. So you want to be going to the bathroom to do a poo between 3 times a day to 3 times a week. Now that's quite a broad range, right? But it's whatever is normal for you within that. We're all kind of slightly different. So whatever kind of works for you within that. We're also looking at the kind of the shape of it. I keep saying about it as if it's a sausage. I kind of want to come up with a word that's not food related. So if anyone has any ideas, please let me know. But effectively, we're looking for a smooth sausage or a sausage with cracks in it. If it is kind of watery and mushy, that kind of needs firming up. Or if you've got constipation, it will be kind of hard pellets and hard to pass. And that's the other thing you want to be thinking about is, is this easy? Can I go to the bathroom and it's not going to take me too long? Am I having any other digestive problems with that? Is it causing me pain or discomfort? And then the last thing I say to look at is really look at the color of your poo. So if you have any blood in there, if it's red or perhaps black, so that's going to be dried blood, that could be a sign that really do go and check it up with your doctor. Might not be anything sinister, but it's definitely something that you want to get kind of looked at. And that's really kind of something that is giving you, this great sign of what your health is on a regular basis without the need to do anything else.
And if let's say it is, whether it's constipated on one end of the spectrum or runny on the other, is fiber the first thing to maybe look at? Or is it just kind of, you got to look at what you've already been eating?
Yeah, so tend to look at, so usually with kind of any diet and lifestyle changes, you'll be able to kind of, for most people, you'll be able to shift the needle for both kind of more kind of mushy kind of diarrhea style poo or kind of more constipated, or if you have really uncomfortable bloating that's staying kind of elevated throughout the day. That tends to be for both looking at fiber, as you say, because fiber effectively, one of the great things it does, or the many wonderful things that it does, is it makes the food move through your gut at a nice steady pace, so not too fast and not too slow. So that's one of the benefits of that. Things for constipation, for example, putting your feet up onto a stool when you're on the loo, it actually straightens out your rectums, that tube that everything's coming out at the end. It's slightly kinked from the way that we sit on the loos, and actually putting your feet up a bit helps it to things to move out. Again, not ignoring urges to go. There's plenty of things. And I think, really thinking again about, the health of the gut microbiome. So some of my own research at King's College London, we looked at how long it takes for food to go through the gut. And we found that people who had a slower, what's called a gut transit time, so more likely to be constipated, had more bacteria that in previous research has been linked to kind of poor heart and metabolic health. And that makes sense, right? Because if, we think about our microbes like us, they want their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if the meal's moving too quickly, if the meal's moving through too slowly, they're not getting their next one as soon. And then they kind of shift how how they're functioning.
And that makes me think of one thing, and it may be totally unrelated, but it reminds me every day I try to drink a smoothie, and that's how I get some of my fruits, but it's pretty much how I get all my vegetables because I hate vegetables. So my question is, when you blend food like that, can your gut still use the nutrients as well as if you were just chewing it whole?
Yeah, so the fiber is still in there. You're not losing the fiber. You're just kind of blending down the structure. So it just might mean that some of it, the form of it slightly changes, but actually you're still getting everything you need. And I'm a big fan of having smoothies. And I think especially if you're really struggling, with your fruits and your veggies, it's such a great way to kind of add those in. And I think you can add things like, if you want to get some extra kind of oomph for your gut microbiome, add some beans in there. You can add, I sometimes blend in white beans, so you don't even taste it. Tofu, another really great one that you can add in, but though not quite so high in fiber. And then you can add some kind of nut butters and stuff like that. And that is not just going to feed your microbes, it's also going to help you stay fuller for longer. It's going to just feel a bit more satiating.
Okay. I'll throw in some white beans. I already throw in some almond butter or peanut butter sometimes. So that'll be another. My smoothie ingredients kind of make people grossed out when I list them, but if they just taste it, actually it tastes okay. earlier you talked about whole grains being essential for getting enough fiber. And I know for me, I actually try to limit carbs in general or grains in general, but am I making a mistake by avoiding true like 100% whole grain stuff?
Yeah, I think carbs have had a bad rap, and I think it tends to be that a lot of the foods that are less healthy for us are things like cakes and biscuits and cookies that all tend to be, these kind of like more refined carbohydrates. And so quite often I'll see that, perhaps as you say, you probably feel better by cutting carbs out because you're actually cutting a lot of these other foods out that are less healthful.
Mhm.
However, really those whole grains are, they're not just a great source of fiber, they've got lots of other nutrients in them. We don't eat nearly enough, and we've got studies upon studies that show how beneficial they are for our health. When it comes to fiber, it does make it a lot harder to get the fiber that you need if you're not eating any grains whatsoever. It's not to say it's impossible, but surprisingly, fruits and vegetables, although you would think they would be pretty high in fiber, aren't actually as high in fiber as whole
Hmm.
grains, nuts and seeds, and beans. So for
Oh,
me,
wow.
if you're having whole grains, you're having the nuts and seeds, and you're having the beans on a regular basis, those are the really like the real kind of big heavy lifting oomph that you're going to get for the fiber side, and have multiple benefits to them as well.
What specifically whole grain should I be looking for? Like the 100% whole wheat bread, brown rice, something else?
Yeah, so whole wheat pasta, brown rice, wild rice, red rice. You
Okay.
could be getting whole wheat bread. I really like wholemeal bread with seeds in it, or looking for a particularly like a rye pumpernickel bread if that's something that you like.
Okay.
I think that when I say something you like, it's all about finding a food that you enjoy and not just eating something because you think that it's going to be good for you, but you don't take any pleasure from it because again, that's going to make it so much harder to keep up. So it's all about kind of these small swaps. So maybe you want to start by swapping your bread to a wholemeal bread with
Mhm.
seeds. Try the pumpernickel rye bread. If you don't like it, go back to the other one, and then just see where these small shifts in your diets can be. I think pasta really, again, a really simple one that you don't even taste really that it's whole grain in comparison just to your regular white pasta. And there's lots of other grains out there as well, like bulgur wheat. You can get buckwheat flour, you can have quinoa, like lots of other different options as well that are quite fun to try.
Hmm. Okay. All right. So you're you're so good at this. You're making it seem appealing. Where I don't have this repulsive like I'm not doing that. You make me want to actually have this positive change. So you're gifted at this stuff. Um, Tell me, I've heard you talk about ADHD before and the connection to that with the gut. Help me understand that.
Yeah, so, again, this is going back to the fact that this is, really, really early science that we're only just beginning to kind of scratch, even just tiny scratch of the surface. Particularly with things like ADHD and I'm going to talk about autism here as well. So we
Hmm.
do see that there's a different gut microbiome. So while everyone has a gut microbiome that is unique to them, we tend to see that there's a more kind of significant difference that is happening there that we're able to kind of identify. But we don't know necessarily whether that's, what is that telling us? We don't know whether that means anything necessarily. What we see from my studies is that, perhaps there's certain, traits within ADHD, for example, that we can perhaps like turn the dial down a little bit with probiotics. So maybe helping to like lower stress levels, ease sleep. So I think, it's there that, perhaps, and we're going to know, I think we're going to have a lot more science on this in the next coming years. And I think it is one of those topics that when it comes to the gut microbiome gets spoken about a lot, but tends to be over-egged and overcooked because it is such an exciting topic. But I think what yes, we need to be careful with how we talk about it. But I think also what's great about the gut microbiome is that unlike our genes, and I'm not talking about this generally, unlike our genes that we can't change, we can change our gut microbiome, and so there might be some things for everybody, that we can help kind of ourselves to feel better on a day-to-day basis. And that might, be even just a kind of small tweaks and small shifts in, certain symptoms of ADHD that perhaps, somebody might struggle with.
Whether it relates to ADHD or just any other aspect of nutrition and health, what are your thoughts on supplements? Anything specific that we should at least be considering, or should we just try for the whole foods first?
Absolutely whole foods first. I know this seems, we're like, oh, we want the silver bullet, we want the thing to take. But I really, the fact that, in food, it's not just about the nutrients we tend to talk about. We talk about calcium or iron, all these things that we're more familiar with. Food contains 26,000 biochemicals, bioactive compounds for our health. And those, there's so much that we don't know about how these things kind of interact. So having food first and really trying to focus on that food first is going to give us so many more benefits. But then it's also recognizing that if that is a struggle, can we then perhaps fill that gap with supplements? And I definitely think that that's, something that, we want to think about on an individual basis. So really, really try and get that food first. Key probably ones for me are really thinking about omega-3s. If you are struggling to get a portion of oily fish a week, ideally 2 portions of oily fish a week, that's something that you can get, a supplement for. If you are vegan or vegetarian or don't eat fish, you can get an algae-based supplement. So it's like a seaweed supplement that's omega-3s. So that's something, and you don't need to spend a lot of money on really expensive supplements. There's a lot of very, very swish marketing out there that want to, tell you that you need to take 1,000 things under the suns of kind of potions and lotions. But actually, it's really about investing in helping make healthier food and healthy eating easier for you. And then if you're really, really struggling or not able to eat the certain things, then yes, bring some supplements in, but don't feel like you need to get some premium, super fancy brand.
I love it. Saving the money.
Yeah.
So my last question, and then I'm going to ask you if there's anything we missed, but my last question is, I've heard you talk about the benefits of getting a kiss or just people touching your face. Can you take me through that?
Yeah, exactly. So we don't just get microbes from the food that we eat. We get microbes from all around us and how we interact. So from just kissing someone, you can swap 80 million microbes within 10 seconds. So obviously, that's from one mouth to another. That's in your oral microbiome because you've got microbes in your mouth, and those microbes can then potentially pass through to your gut. But we also see people who live together tend to have a more similar gut microbiome. We see even just people who don't live together but are really close and, great friends. Perhaps you see, your best friend who lives down the road every day, shaking hands, hugging, you're sharing microbes. And the reason for that is that, we have microbes all around us and on every single surface. Before we even existed on this planet was dominated by microbes. So every time we kind of touch something and we put it in our mouths, there's perhaps some introduction of microbes there. And then kind of between people as well is such an important way of us getting microbes. So when people say, oh, I'm struggling with my diet, I'm like, well, let's think broader than that. Can we think about, going for a walk in nature, because we know there's different microbes out and, soil is very microbe rich. It's about sharing a meal with your family. You're already kind of sharing microbes there. So there's many things that we're doing for our gut health without even realizing it.
Wow.
That's helping our microbes.
That makes me think the soil part makes me wonder about, have you heard of grounding, where you walk barefoot on the grass or soil? I wonder if that has something to do with each other, or if I'm just pulling two things that aren't connected.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we do know that there's been kind of small studies that have shown that just by simply putting your hands in a bucket of soil 3 times a day, that kind of changed their skin microbiome and then has a knock-on effect onto their gut microbiome. And we see with people who are gardeners that they tend to have a more diverse gut microbiome. So it could be just, doesn't have to mean if you don't have a garden or you don't have a park nearby that you can get to, having a house plant or a terrarium or something that you can kind of interact in. And also it's so great for your mental well-being. We know that spending 2 hours in nature across the week, whether that's in one go or split up across the week, is related to better mental health as well. So it's kind of double win.
Wow. I love how it's all integrated.
Absolutely. Our whole body is communicating and talking to each other, and we just need to join the dots a bit more.
Yeah. So anything that I haven't asked that you feel like would be important to know and say, just for kind of a last fact to leave us with?
What can I say? I do think there's a piece around fermented foods, which is really interesting as well, if people are keen to try that in supporting. So I feel like we talked about, we've talked about fluids and hydration. We've talked about fiber being important for your gut microbiome, but there's a third F that I tend to talk about, which is ferments. And when it comes to your gut-brain connection, there's really interesting, tiny kind of early signals around kefir, which is a fermented milk drink. Tends to be the ferment that I would recommend people to start on if they're new to having fermented foods. It's the one that's got the most evidence behind it to date. And it's also a really easy one to, it's basically kind of a little bit of sourness to this milk that you can add into your breakfast, whether it's to, with your granola and your fruit and your nuts in the morning. I sometimes add it to dressings, or you can also chop some herbs into it and then have it as a side, as a more kind of yogurt with kind of fish or chicken or whatever you're having, or your veggies. And there was kind of two studies. The first one found that people who were taking a kind of glass to 2 glasses of kefir a day, their relational memory improved. So this is a type of memory that helps people to remember where they left the keys, or where, people's faces, and I think that was, kind of interesting that this food was kind of changing that. And then when it came to kind of mood and talking more about that mood aspect, there was another study that was kind of done in a similar way. So people were drinking kefir, and they actually did brain scans for this. And they showed them kind of faces that had, angry faces and kind of happy faces. And the people who were drinking the kefir rather than placebo had less of a reaction to the angry faces. They were more like chilled out. They kind of less responsive. And what we think could be happening here is, from my studies, we see that mice fed kefir helped to kind of help them to make GABA, which is your calming neurotransmitter. So just kind of, an interesting narrative of perhaps how we're joining the dots in this really kind of new area of science.
That's fascinating. And help me spell that. Is it KEFIR? Is that the milk you're talking about?
Yeah, KEFIR, yes.
Okay. I've never seen that in stores. I wonder if it's widely available yet.
It is here in the UK. It tends to be, for us here in the UK, it's either in the Polish section, but we very much have it in other sections at most supermarkets. But maybe it's something, have a look. Ask this, supermarket attendant next time you're in, see if it's there. Or you can easily make it yourself as well. It's very, very simple to make. You can buy the kefir granules online. They will arrive to your door. And then you simply add them to milk and let it ferment over, depending how warm it is, where you are, overnight or for longer, and then have it in the fridge and use it. And you can just keep reusing them. So it's very affordable.
Okay. I may try that. Be adventurous with it.
Yeah.
Emily, thank you so much for this. You are a gift and a joy, and you're making such an impact on so many people. So thank you for taking the time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so great to chat.
Hey, thanks so much for being here today. Before you go, would you hit that subscribe button so that future episodes come right to you? Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.